Yarden James had no idea why he'd agreed to board that rust-stained old ferry in the first place until he saw her. The wind off the Atlantic cut through the tailored wool of his navy coat as he stepped onto the creaking deck, the boards groaning beneath his Italian leather shoes. His assistant had begged him to take the private helicopter, but the contract required a discreet arrival. And the last thing he needed was another headline about the reclusive billionaire CEO making power plays on protected land. So here he was, surrounded by chipped paint, peeling benches, and the smell of salt and diesel. He checked his watch, 40 minutes to the island. 40 minutes of pretending he wasn't a man who usually traveled in black, tinted SUVs and flew first class on private jets. A voice cut through the wind. "You're standing in my spot." Yarden turned his head and froze. She was leaning against the side rail, arms crossed over a worn but clean utility jacket, her copper-brown hair pulled into a messy bun. Her lips were curved into the kind of half-smile that made it hard to tell if she was annoyed or just amused. Either way, it hit him like a punch to the chest. He blinked, didn't realize seats were assigned. "They're not," she said, shrugging one shoulder. "But that one happens to be the only place on this boat that doesn't smell like fish and regret." Yarden's mouth twitched. "In that case." He stepped aside, gesturing with a sweep of his hand. "All yours." She walked past him, her boots clunking against the deck, and dropped onto the bench like she'd done it 100 times. She didn't thank him. She didn't even look at him again. And somehow that irritated him more than if she'd been rude. He sat across from her, arms folded, eyes scanning the gray horizon. But every few seconds his gaze flicked back to her. "What's your name?" he finally asked. She didn't look up. "Why? Because if I'm going to stare at you the entire trip, I should at least know your name." That got her attention. Her eyes met his sharp, amused, curious. "Celia Garner." "I'm Yarden," she raised an eyebrow. "Yarden. That a real name or something you made up to impress people?" He laughed. It was short and unexpected. "It's real." "Blame my mother." "Well, Yarden," Celia said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, "you've got about 35 minutes left to impress me, so you better get moving." He leaned back, watching her. Challenge accepted. They didn't stop talking the rest of the ride. Celia told him she lived on the island year-round, worked with the wildlife conservation team, and ran the little community center on her off days. "Not glamorous," she'd said, "but I like it." She didn't ask what he did, and he didn't offer. For the first time in years, he liked being anonymous. Just a guy on a boat, not the CEO of J-Tech Industries. Not the man Forbes once called America's most elusive billionaire. When they docked, Celia hopped off with the easy grace of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Yarden followed, carrying nothing but a leather duffel and a briefcase. "You here for business or pleasure?" she asked as they walked down the dock, her breath fogging in the cool air. "Business," he said. "Meeting with the Land Commission." She gave a low whistle. "You're the one trying to buy that northern ridge, aren't you?" He froze. "What makes you think that?" "Because no one comes to this island in early spring unless they're trying to take something from it," she said, stepping ahead of him. "And you don't look like the type who came for the bird watching." That stung more than it should have. "I'm not trying to take anything," he said, catching up. "It's an eco-research facility plan. Clean energy, solar, wind, still concrete, still infrastructure. Still jobs," he snapped back, sharper than he meant to. She stopped walking, turning to face him. "So this is the part where I'm supposed to be impressed?" she asked. "Because you're not building a hotel or a strip mall, you're still changing something that doesn't want to be changed." Yarden stared at her. And then, for some reason he couldn't explain, he said, "Do you want to have dinner with me?" Celia blinked. "What, dinner?" he repeated. "Tonight I'll be here for a few days. Let me buy you dinner." "Let me guess," she said. "You're staying at the fancy bed and breakfast with the view of the cliffs," he nodded, fighting a grin. "You've got me all figured out already, huh?" She tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle. "You're out of your element," she said finally, "but you're not a jerk." "Yet, is that a yes? Only if you promise not to talk about solar panels." He held out his hand. "Deal." She shook it. And just like that, Yarden James, the man who'd built a billion-dollar empire by keeping people at arm's length, found himself smiling like a teenager over a handshake. Later that night, he sat at a table by the window in the island's only restaurant, wearing a crisp white shirt and no tie for the first time in a decade. The place was small, warm, filled with the scent of garlic and fresh seafood. Celia walked in 5 minutes late, wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater, her hair down and windblown. She looked like she belonged here, like she belonged everywhere. "You clean up well," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "So do you." Dinner was easy, too easy. They laughed, argued over the best pizza toppings, shared a bottle of wine. Yarden found himself leaning in, listening, not to the words but to the way she said them. Like everything she felt lived just beneath the surface. When the check came, he pulled out his card without hesitation. "You didn't even look at the price," she said, watching him. "I didn't need to." She narrowed her eyes. "You're not just some guy on a ferry, are you?" He paused. "No," he admitted. "I'm not," but he didn't say more, and for now she didn't ask. As they walked back to the inn, the moonlight casting silver across the dirt path, Celia stopped at the gate. "I don't bring strangers here," she said, her voice quiet. "Then don't think of me as a stranger." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his, and then she kissed him, soft, quick. But enough to knock the air out of his lungs. She pulled back, her cheeks flushed. "Good night, Yarden." He didn't move as she walked away, her silhouette fading into the dark. And right then, standing alone on an island he'd only come to for business, Yarden James realized he was in trouble. He didn't believe in fate, but he believed in her. Celia hadn't expected to see him again so soon, if at all, but there he was the next morning, standing outside the weathered one-room library with a coffee in each hand and a question in his eyes. "You strike me as a no-cream, no-sugar type," he said, offering one of the cups without preamble. She took it, surprised. "That's either a good guess or borderline disturbing." He grinned. "You said you work here on your off days." "I figured I'd find you. You remembered that." "I remember everything you say." Celia blinked, thrown off by the directness. "Most people forget half of what I say before I've finished saying it." "I'm not most people." That much she already knew. She pushed open the door and led him inside. The room smelled like old paper and salt air, the windows rattling faintly in the coastal wind. Shelves lined the walls, their contents uneven and donated, some cracked spines taped together with care. A hand-painted sign above the desk read, "Take one, leave one, or just sit and read." Yarden scanned the shelves. "You run this place alone, pretty much. Mrs. Carlyle used to manage it, but she moved to the mainland last spring. I couldn't stand the idea of it closing." He turned to her. "You ever think about leaving?" "Sometimes," she said, brushing a curl behind her ear. "Then I remember how it feels to breathe here, how quiet it gets after the rain. I don't know if I could trade that for traffic and noise and late-night takeout." Yarden let that linger in the air before stepping closer to a shelf, trailing a finger along the titles. "You've got first editions in here." Celia laughed softly. "Some of the locals don't realize what they're donating. I try not to correct them." He picked up a copy of To the Lighthouse and flipped it open. "This one's signed." "I know. Why is it just sitting on a shelf?" "Because books are meant to be held," she said. "Not locked in glass." He looked at her differently then, not with curiosity, but with something more dangerous. Admiration. "You think about things most people don't." "You mean I'm strange?" "I mean you're rare." Celia didn't know how to answer that, so she busied herself straightening a stack of paperbacks on the counter. He watched her. "Can I ask you something? Does it involve bird watching?" "No," he said. "Last night, that kiss, did you mean it?" She paused. The question wasn't casual, it carried weight. "I don't kiss people I don't mean to." "Good," he said, setting the book down, "because I haven't stopped thinking about it." Celia felt her chest tighten. "You're not staying long." "No," he admitted. "But that doesn't mean I'm not here now." She didn't know how to respond to that either. Later that day, she found herself walking alongside him through the northern trails, the path winding through pine and rock. It wasn't part of her usual routine, but Yarden had asked to see the land for himself, the untouched parts, not the sloped ridge the commission wanted to sell. "You're quiet," she said, crunching over pine needles. "I'm listening." "To what?" "The way the wind moves through this place. The way it smells different from the mainland." She looked over at him. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharper than before, focused. "You're not like other developers," she said. Most of them show up with maps and numbers and talk about how underutilized everything is. I didn't lie when I said I wasn't trying to take anything, but you are trying to change something. I'm trying to create something that respects what's already here. Celia stopped walking. That's a nice line. But what happens when your investors want more than just solar panels and wind turbines? He faced her. I don't answer to anyone. You really believe that? I built my company from nothing. I didn't inherit it. I don't take orders. Then what are you doing here? She asked. Why this island? Why now? He hesitated. I needed to see if it was worth protecting. And is it? His gaze dropped to her lips before returning to her eyes. Yes, Celia's breath caught, but she turned away before he could see it. This island doesn't need a protector, she said. It needs people to leave it alone. That's not an option anymore. They returned to the village in silence, the tension between them thick and unspoken. At the edge of the harbor, Yarden stopped. Dinner again tonight, she shook her head. Not tonight, he didn't push. Tomorrow, we'll see. He left with a nod, disappearing down the road toward the inn. Celia watched him go, her heart doing something unpredictable. She didn't want him, didn't want to feel the warmth that had bloomed in her chest when he said he remembered everything she said, but the truth was, she did. And she wasn't ready for what that meant. Celia didn't go to the community center the next day. She needed space. Distance. Time to think without being pulled into another conversation where Yarden looked at her like he could see straight through her skin, and into the parts she kept hidden. Instead, she hiked the southern trail, the one few visitors ever bothered with. It wound through dense brush and opened into a jagged cliff that dropped into the sea. The waves below crashed against the rocks with rhythmic violence, and for a while she just stood there, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She hadn't planned to like him. She hadn't planned on the way her body leaned toward his without meaning to, or how his voice lingered in her head long after he left. She definitely hadn't planned on the ache that stirred when she realized she wanted more time with him and didn't know if she'd get it. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up, and she headed back toward the village. The clouds were rolling in, heavy and low, promising a storm. As she reached the main road, she saw the black SUV parked in front of the town hall. It didn't belong to anyone from the island. She ducked behind the fence of the old post office and watched as a man in a charcoal overcoat stepped out of the back seat. He was broad, clean-cut, and carried a black leather folder under one arm. His driver remained in the front seat, engine running. The man didn't look around. He walked straight into the building like he owned the place. Celia waited until the door shut before circling toward the back. The windows were old and warped, but she could see enough. Yarden stood inside, alone with the man. They weren't shaking hands. They weren't smiling. She leaned in closer, but the glass muted their voices. Still, Yarden's posture told her everything. He was tense, jaw rigid, eyes locked on the other man with a sharpness that hadn't been there before. She stepped back and left before either of them noticed her. That night, a storm rolled over the island, drenching the streets and sending wind howling against the windows. The power flickered twice before going out completely. Celia lit the lanterns in the library, careful with the matches, then settled beneath a wool blanket with a book she didn't read. There was a knock at the door, not loud, just enough to be heard over the rain. She opened it to find Yarden soaked through and breathing hard. I need to talk to you, he said. She stepped aside and he entered without waiting. You're wet, she said, shutting the door. I walked from the inn. Roads are blocked. She handed him a towel from the emergency bin and crossed her arms. Was that your lawyer I saw at town hall earlier? He didn't look surprised. He's not my lawyer anymore. What was he doing here? Trying to stop me. From what? Giving up the land bid. Celia stared at him. You're pulling out. Yes. Why? He dropped the towel on the chair, his shirt clinging to his skin. Because I meant what I said. About not taking anything, and because I realized I was doing this for the wrong reasons. She stepped back, wary. What were the right reasons? At first, I thought I could build something better, cleaner, but that wasn't it. I came here because I was restless. Because I wanted to prove I still had control over something. And now I'm trying to prove something else. She didn't speak, didn't move. He stepped closer. I'm not staying on the island, not forever, but I'm not leaving tomorrow either. Not unless you tell me to. You think this is about you? Her voice was quiet. "No," he said. "I think it's about us or whatever this is." Celia's voice dropped. "You don't know me. I know that you haven't let anyone in for a long time. I know that you love this place so fiercely it scares you. I know that when you read, you lose track of time. And I know that when you kissed me, it wasn't just because you were curious." She turned away, heart pounding. "I saw you at the window," he said. "This afternoon." "Watching? I didn't mean to. I didn't want you to see that side of it, but I'm glad you did, because now you know what I'm walking away from." She faced him again. "That deal would have made you a fortune. I already have a fortune." She narrowed her eyes. "Then what do you want?" He stepped into the lamplight, his face shadowed but open. "You." The word hung in the air, unflinching. "I want to wake up and know I'm not just building things that look good on paper. I want to know that when someone challenges me, it's because they believe in something more than money. I want to sit in a room lit by lanterns and listen to the rain with a woman who sees through me and still doesn't walk away." "You're intense," she whispered. He smiled. "You're worth it." She didn't close the distance, not yet, but her voice softened. "You can't fix me. I'm not trying to. I'm not easy. I don't want easy." Lightning cracked across the sky and the power surged back on. The lights blinked to life, and for the first time they stood fully illuminated. No rain, no shadows, no excuses. Celia took one step forward. "This doesn't mean anything unless you mean it." "I do." Her hands slid into his, and when she kissed him this time, it wasn't rushed or uncertain. It was quiet, steady, and full of everything they hadn't said. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "You'll have to prove it." "I plan to." And in the storm-lit silence of the island library, neither of them said another word. The ferry engine hummed low in the distance, barely audible beneath the morning gulls circling above the harbor. Celia stood at the edge of the dock, her scarf tugged tight against her neck, watching the vessel draw closer through the mist. Yarden was leaving. He'd told her the night before, quietly, with no ceremony. He had business on the mainland that couldn't be postponed, but he hadn't offered a date for when he'd return. She hadn't asked. She'd nodded, then gone home and stared at the ceiling for hours, unsure whether the ache in her chest was disappointment or fear. Now, with the wind brushing against her skin and his figure stepping off the ferry ramp, suitcase in hand, the ache had a name. He approached without breaking eye contact, his coat flaring slightly as he moved. The morning light hit his face differently here, softer, less guarded. "You came," he said. "I figured you wouldn't want to leave without a goodbye." "I wouldn't have." She looked down at the worn boards between them. "You'll be back." "I will," he said without hesitation. "But I need to handle a few things first. There's fallout from backing out of the bid." "I thought I could delegate it, but it's messier than I expected." Celia's fingers tightened around the edge of her sleeve. "You could have stayed and let your team deal with it." "I could have," he agreed. "But I won't ask people to clean up decisions I made for personal reasons." She exhaled slowly. "So that's what this was, a personal reason." "You're not a reason," he said. "You're the standard now." Her eyes flicked to his. "That's a terrifying thing to say." "It's a terrifying thing to feel." She didn't answer. The ferry horn blew once, low and final. "I thought I'd feel relief walking away from the land deal," he said, adjusting the strap of his bag. "But all I feel is a need to prove I didn't come here just to leave." "You don't owe me anything." "I disagree." Celia's throat tightened. "You'll be gone a while, I know. You don't have to promise anything." "I'm not making promises," he said gently. "I'm making plans." The rain held off, but the sky remained low and heavy, mirroring the weight in her chest. He leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her forehead, simple, warm, and deliberate. "Stay difficult," he said. "Stay exactly you." She watched him bored without moving. When the ferry pulled away, she didn't wave. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, letting the wind dry her eyes before anything could fall. Days passed, then weeks. She kept busy cataloging new donations at the library, coordinating with the lighthouse volunteers, helping organize the spring festival with the town council. The island shifted around her, preparing for the thaw of summer, and she let it carry her forward. No word came. Not a call, not a letter. Not a single trace, until one afternoon in early June when the mayor knocked on the library door. "There's someone asking for you at the community center," he said. Said it was urgent. Celia wiped her hands on her jeans, heart skipping. Who is it? The mayor shrugged. Didn't say. But he's wearing shoes that cost more than my truck. She didn't run, but she walked faster than she had in months. When she reached the community center, the door was propped open. She stepped inside, scanning the room, and froze. Yarden stood near the back wall, surrounded by boxes. Beside him sat a rolled-up architectural model, half unfurled across the long wooden table. He looked up and smiled when he saw her, the kind of smile that held history and hope and something more dangerous certainty. "You're early," she said, unable to mask the breathlessness in her voice. "I've been late," he said. "I'm here to fix that." She crossed her arms, wary. "What's all this?" He gestured to the model. "Community-funded restoration plan for the old cannery building. Green technology, zero development footprint. I brought investors, silent ones. Ones who don't want anything back but a plaque on the side." Celia's eyes narrowed. "Why would they do that?" "Because I asked them to, and because I told them if they didn't, I'd find ones who would." She stepped closer, eyes scanning the detailed mock-up. "This isn't a land grab, no. It's a gift. To who? To you, to the island, to everyone who ever thought they didn't have the power to protect what mattered to them." Her voice caught. "You did this for us." "No," he said. "I did this because I see you. And I wanted to be the kind of man who deserved to." She stared at him, her hands trembling slightly. "You disappeared. I needed time to walk away from things that didn't serve me, to build something that did. And now I'm asking if you'll let me stay long enough to prove I meant every word." The silence between them was no longer heavy, it was thick with possibility. "You realize," she said slowly, "the people here aren't going to trust you overnight." "I'm not asking them to," he said. "I'm asking you." Celia stepped forward until there was nothing between them but air and memory. "I waited," she said. "Even when I told myself I wouldn't." He reached for her hand. "I know. I told myself it was foolish. You were right." She laughed, quiet, shaky but real. "You always say the wrong thing at the right time, comes with the territory." She looked up at him. "You're really not leaving. Not unless you send me away." She didn't. Instead, she kissed him, not cautious, not questioning, solid, grounded, earned. Later that summer, the island held its first public unveiling of the restored building. The villagers gathered in linen shirts and sundresses. Children danced around the picnic tables, and Celia stood beside Yarden as he handed over the symbolic key to the mayor. He didn't give a speech. He didn't need to. Everyone knew who he was now, not just a man with money, not just a name whispered in headlines, but someone who'd come quietly, stayed honestly, and left a piece of himself behind. That night, as the stars blinked open over the dark water and the music faded into silence, Yarden pulled Celia onto the empty dock. "You remember the first thing I said to you?" he asked. She nodded. "You were standing in my spot." "No," he said. "You were standing in mine." She smiled, and he kissed her again, this time with nothing left undone. The new center opened to the public 3 weeks later, on a bright afternoon laced with sea breeze and the scent of wild thyme. Its wooden plank entrance bore a small bronze plaque that read, "For the ones who protect what others overlook." No names, just purpose. Celia stood barefoot on the stone porch, watching children race across the newly planted green space, their laughter echoing between the trees. The building had been designed to blend in weathered siding, wide windows that let the island light in, and solar panels that glittered discreetly on the roof. Not a single corner of it looked out of place. Yarden came up behind her, his jacket slung over one shoulder, the sleeves of his shirt rolled halfway up. His eyes didn't scan the crowd, they found her immediately. "You disappeared after the ribbon cutting," he said. "I needed air." He stepped closer, voice low. "You okay?" "I'm adjusting." "To what?" "To the fact that you stayed." Yarden leaned a shoulder against the post beside her, watching the waves in the distance. "I didn't stay for the island, I know." They watched in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Then Celia broke it. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Yarden didn't flinch. "You think?" "I'm still figuring out how to say it." He took her hand, running his thumb along the inside of her wrist. "I've loved you since you told me books were meant to be held." She laughed softly. "That was weeks ago. I'm a fast learner." She turned to him fully, the breeze tugging her hair across her cheek. "Are you planning to stay on the island? I bought the old inn. Celia blinked. You what? I made the owners an offer they couldn't refuse. They were already looking to retire. I'm turning the top floor into a permanent residence. The rest will run as a retreat for visiting scholars and researchers. Quiet people, the kind who don't mind silence. Her lips parted. That's unexpected. I thought about building something new, he said. But you taught me that the best things already exist. They just need someone who sees them. She took a step closer, her hands sliding up his chest. You're really not going back. I'll have meetings off island, but my home is here now. If you'll let it be. I will. Later, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light across the harbor, Yarden set a blanket down on the beach and uncorked a bottle of wine he'd brought from the mainland. Not from some exclusive vineyard, just one he remembered she'd once mentioned liking. They sat barefoot in the sand, the bottle between them, and passed a paper box of still warm pastries from the bakery down the hill. Celia nudged his knee. You don't have to prove anything, you know. I'm not trying to. Good. Because I like you better when you're not performing. I'm not performing, she tilted her head. Then what's all this? He looked around at the beach, the sky melting into lavender, their shoes forgotten behind them. This is me choosing something, not because it advances a strategy. Not because it makes sense on a spreadsheet, just because it feels like home. She pressed her lips to his shoulder, the gesture light and sure. You're getting better at this. At what? Living. He gave a low chuckle. I had a good teacher. The next morning, they walked to the farmer's market together, fingers laced, stopping every few feet to talk to neighbors who now knew Yarden not as a billionaire, but as the man who helped rebuild the cannery, who volunteered to set up tables at the spring festival, who once helped a kid fix a broken bike chain in the rain without saying a word about it afterward. Celia watched him barter for wild strawberries with an old woman who had no idea he'd once been on the cover of Fortune magazine. She saw the way he knelt to tie a child's shoe without being asked, and she realized something had shifted not just in him, but in her. She no longer felt the need to protect the island from change. Because what had arrived wasn't a threat, it was someone who had learned how to belong without taking anything away. That night, he led her to the lighthouse, where soft lights lined the path and a folded blanket waited at the top of the tower. Without a word, he opened a small velvet box. Inside wasn't a ring, it was a single old key. This unlocks the door to the library, he said. Your library. I had a replica made, the original's still with you, but I want this one too, so I can let myself in when you're not looking. She stared down at it, her throat tightening. I know you're not ready for rings, but I want to promise that this is something we're building. Together. She pressed the key into his palm, then leaned forward and kissed him slowly. I promise. They didn't need a ceremony that night, just the stars, the sound of the tide, and the quiet understanding that what they had wasn't fleeting. It was the kind of love that didn't demand attention. It simply endured. Years later, people still talked about the man who came to the island to build something and ended up staying to protect it. They talked about the couple who ran the library and the old inn, who planted wild herbs around the lighthouse and always walked hand in hand, even when they thought no one was watching. But for Yarden and Celia, the story was never about what people said. It was about the quiet mornings filled with laughter over mismatched mugs, the way his hand always found hers under the table, the way she always left the porch light on when he worked late. And the way they loved each other without conditions, without fear, and without ever needing to speak about it more than once. Because once had been enough. They had no need for grand declarations after that. They were already living in one.